Hello, this is Amir Ali Alibhai from the Aga Khan Museum. I'm the head of performing arts and the artistic director for the virtual museum. And today I welcome you to Museum Sundays again. And our theme for this last week has been hope. And this is something that's very important in this age, in this time, in what we're all going through around the world right now hope. So we start off with something special, a performance by Dervesh, Farzad Al Jafari, who's the head or the master servant of Rumi Canada. And he's a Mevlevi Dervesh, where whirling is a big part of the act of meditation, but it is also about the act of listening, something that's very important in our day and age. And I hope you enjoy this ritual, if you want, by Farzad Al Jafari. And then stay tuned. I'll be back with something else after. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Our next segment is about the work of a photographer, and he is somebody who documented a project that was about folding origami cranes. And this was a peace project to mark all the lives lost in Hiroshima and a society that had to deal with hope for a better and brighter future. So, photographer Rick Alfred shares his story with us in this relatively short segment. Please, I hope you enjoy it, and then come back for our last piece.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, friends. A very warm welcome on this slightly dodgy afternoon. I think fall is approaching, so wonderful that you made the time to be with us today. My name is Dr. Ulrike Al-Khamis. I'm the Director of Collections and Public Programs here at the Aga Khan Museum. Before I have the great pleasure today to present someone truly special to you, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which the Aga Khan Museum stands today has been a meeting place for cultures for many thousands of years, under the stewardship of the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, including the Huron-Wendat, the Petun First Nations, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. We honor them and we express our sincere gratitude to share the land. On to our speaker for this afternoon, whom some of you might already have encountered this morning in his capacity as a faculty member of the latest Fred Roberts photography workshop. To introduce Rick Allred means first and foremost to introduce an outstanding, inspirational human being with a heart big enough to nest the whole world. Yes, he also happens to be a renowned photographer, a photography instructor, and a visual artist of some note. But today, it is the human being with a big heart I'm honored to introduce. A heart dedicated to encouraging others to discover and explore their humanity as a means to helping create a more harmonious, peaceful, and hopeful world. The African-American writer Abjani once said, "The acknowledgement of a single possibility can change everything." This is exactly what happened when Rick Allred read Sadako and the Thousand Paper Cranes, a book that was to change the course of his life and led him in 2018 to found In the Folds of Peace, a project to invite members of the public across North America to fold 1 million paper cranes for Hiroshima, Japan, devastated together with Nagasaki a little bit later by American atom bombs on the 6th and 9th of August 1945. It is this project Rick will talk to you about and invite you to join today. In August 2019, 74 years after those devastating events. Before I invite Rick to the podium now, may I please ask you all to silence your cell phones and also remind you that voice and video recordings are not allowed this afternoon in the auditorium. And now, please welcome our very special guest for this afternoon, Rick Allred.
I gave a talk in Albuquerque, New Mexico about this, and I started that talk with saying, I'm pleasantly freaking out, was when I started the talk with, because just like any human being, sometimes we get a little nervous when we start doing something like this, but I can't think of a better place to be, so pleasantly freaking out, sorry. Thank you very much for the acknowledgement, it was really heartfelt. So I'm going to just talk about kind of my journey, how this all started and kind of where it's gone and where it might go, you know, and back in 2017, there was a lot of drama going on in the world. There's always a lot of drama going on in the world. But then at that particular time, I found that my friends and I were just kind of sitting around and complaining a lot. And I was getting really frustrated with that. And I didn't want to do that anymore, but I didn't know what to do. It was like, where does my voice go here? And a friend of mine, my friend Yoshiko, she had given me this book called Sadako and the Thousand Paper Cranes. And it's a book based on the story of a young girl in Hiroshima whose family survived the atomic bomb. And when she was in the hospital, her friends and family, about 3 years later, she contracted what they called the atomic bomb disease, which was leukemia. And while she was in the hospital, her friends and family reminded her of the tradition of folding 1,000 paper cranes to get your wish for peace and for health and prosperity. And it had been sitting on my nightstand, and one night I just thought, well, I'm just going to start reading it, and I just read it the whole way through. She ended up passing away, but her friends and her classmates were inspired by her courage, and so this was shortly after the war, and they started a campaign to raise funds to create a children's peace memorial statue monument to be dedicated to all the children who died in the effects of the atomic bomb. And that was really inspiring to me, and the more I read about them, the other book there, 1,000 Paper Cranes, that book is about her family before, during, and after the bomb. And the more I learned about the people of Hiroshima, the more I realized, I forgot the mic's here, and I don't have to talk into that. The people of Hiroshima could have a reason to be angry, and they weren't. They were focusing on, we're having conversations for peace and education. And when I read more about that, I was just like, I was moved by that, because it was like, oh, well, instead of complaining, what if I started having the conversations I want to have in the world? And then the next question was, well, what are those conversations? So it was kind of like, well, what if we started, when you met somebody new, if you asked them, what do they want for their families, or their communities, or their region, nation? And if it doesn't scare you too much, what do they want for the world? Those are conversations that is a place where my voice fits. And inspired by the book, I decided to start having conversations with people. And then it was like, and that's the Children's Peace Memorial, and that's Sadako on top, releasing a crane. And so this was my idea. Okay, I'm going to fold 1,000 paper cranes. I'm going to sneak over to Hiroshima, and then I'm going to come back to America, and I'm not going to tell anybody. And it was all because I was afraid, well, if I don't do it, and if I fail, then nobody will know. And then it's like, well, wait, this project is about talking to people, so I might want to talk to people. And so I called a friend of mine, and her daughter, and asked if they wanted to be involved. And they were inspired by it, so they were like, yeah, let's do this. And so I was like, okay, well, we'll fold 1,000 paper cranes, and we'll get other people to fold 1,000 paper cranes, and we'll take 2,000 paper cranes to Hiroshima. And that was good for about a week, and then we were like, this project's going to end in like a month, and it'll be done. And we didn't want it to be done. So we're like, well, what's a number that's so far out there, there's no way we could possibly do it ourselves? Is that like 5,000, 100,000? And then I was like, hey, what about 1,000 thousands? And then I was like, how many zeros is that? And it was like, oh, that's 1 million. And that got my heart beating a little bit and got me a little scared. And then we're like, I think that's the number. Because there's no way we can do it ourselves. Now we have to talk to people. And let's just see where this adventure takes us. And so that's when we started. It started with just talking to the next person, and talking to the next person, and talking to the next person. Even if it scared me. That was the first crane I made. And I made it because I found out that there was another group of kids in Albuquerque, New Mexico that were inspired by the book. And they had created Children's Peace Memorial in Albuquerque. And so I went to the memorial, and I dug through my car and found a piece of blue paper and folded my first crane. I read the instructions in the back of the book, and on the trunk of my car I was folding the crane, and I left that at the Peace Memorial. And that's how the project started. And then it was like, how do you talk to people? You know, it was just like, well, you just kind of open your mouth. But then we founded the company, the organization, and we just started folding cranes. And we started teaching people to fold cranes. And then when I'm traveling and I'm on a plane, I would just start folding cranes. Especially if I was nervous talking to the person next to me. And I'd fold more cranes. And more cranes. And more cranes. And usually somebody would be like, hey, is that for a project or something? And it was like, yes. As a matter of fact, it is. Do you want to learn how to fold one? You know, and that's how it really started out for me. Too nervous to talk to somebody, so I would just fold until somebody would actually ask me about these. And then I had a reason to talk to them. That's how it started. And, you know, who would think that these little pieces of paper would give me permission to talk to strangers? And that's really what it's been about. And so that was in the In-Flight magazine, and I pasted it in my journal. And so here and there I get to teach one or two people. I get to teach classes. And I'm not like forcing anything. It's just like, what do you want for your family? What do you want for your community? And all of a sudden we find that we have things in common. Instead of, I'm not going to talk to you because you're one of them. Whatever that is for you. And, you know, I'm a little embarrassed to say that sometimes I have some thems. And I try to just like push those aside. And so I kind of started getting the word out, and boxes of cranes started showing up at my house. And we count them, we string them up, we send thank yous. We try to encourage people, make sure when you're learning that you're talking to each other. And the first trip, we went August 6, 2017 to Hiroshima on Peace Day. And we took a little over 10,000 paper cranes to Hiroshima. And I also was able to do a TEDx talk in Albuquerque, New Mexico about the project and the fears that come up. Because that's just human. This is where we dropped off the cranes. There's some little kiosks that kind of occur around that Children's Peace Memorial, and that's where people bring cranes from all over the world as an expression of peace and connection. And so now I'm talking to more people, and my heart still beats a lot, because that's just human. And you just keep talking. And I keep folding. So these are just some pictures of the cranes that come in. Last year, my studio was quite full with cranes, and on our second trip, we took a little over 35,000 cranes to Hiroshima. And it's starting to look like this again. Little by little, they come in. And that was us taking 35,000 cranes to Hiroshima. There's those kiosks where everybody brings the cranes as an expression of peace. And dropping them, you don't just drop off 35,000 cranes. People hear about it. We got to meet the deputy director of the museum. A local newspaper came to talk to us. And then as we're hanging all these cranes, people started crowding around and wanting to help us hang the cranes. And that's those things that just kind of like make your heart thump. You know, people just start talking to each other. And that's really what the whole project has been about. And the funny thing is that once you get interested in something, you see it everywhere. This was in a record store. I went in a record store. I didn't know they still had them. And I went in and I was looking at records, and I turned around and there's cranes in the window. And so I went outside, and when I went outside, then I saw the sky reflected in the window. And it just makes me think of like this whole journey. You always hear that it's the journey, not the destination. It's like I have an idea of where this is going, but I'm not sure how it's going to get there. And I'm going to be really interested when that millionth crane shows up to see where we're at and what's happening. A little side effect of this project has been, I'm in a Master's in Fine Art program right now for photography. And my mentors, when they heard, I hadn't told them I was doing the project, I hadn't told them I did a talk. And when they heard about that, they were like, why aren't you bringing this into your program? It's all your voice. Your photos are having people see new things. Your talk and your cranes are having people think and say new things. Why just bring it all in? And so in my photography program, they've allowed me to start doing these large installations of cranes that get inspired by different ideas. This particular one is called The Blaze. It's about how everybody has a passion, even if they haven't discovered it yet. And sometimes we dismiss people as not having passion because of where they're from or what they do. And if you take the time to look and get to know them, even if that means getting to know yourself, you'll discover that fire that's burning inside. So that was that installation. That makes me happy. There was a lot of cranes. It was fun. And this last semester, I decided to do an installation that was a portrait of Sadako, the young girl in the book. And then I ended up adding a little video to it. You know, sometimes time seems like it's going so fast, and other times it seems like it's going very slow. And all of this came from that first crane. And so when we go outside and teach you to fold the cranes, you can write a message or piece on it before you fold it. You can write a message on it afterwards. I'd love to have you participate. But even more than that, I would love for you to just kind of pay attention to life. And when you find that thing that just like calls to you, that has your heart thump a little bit, step towards it, you know, and even if your heart starts beating faster, you know, just know you're pleasantly freaking out. It's not going to kill you. And then have the next conversation that needs to be had. And you'll never know where it's going to take you. Thank you.
So, In the Folds of Peace, quite an inspiring project, right? So our last piece today, our last segment, is a very inspiring and inspired, passionate performance by trumpeter Amir El-Safar, who's based in New York, originally from Iraq. And his work brings together, you know, it's at that juncture between jazz and Iraqi maqam. A very passionate performer. I've always enjoyed him. We've presented him a few times at the museum, and he's an artist we hope to continue to work with. So I hope you enjoy this excerpt from his performance in 2015 at the Aga Khan Museum. I think it's time to revisit. Enjoy.
لعمرك ما يرجى شفائي والهوى له بين جلدي والعظام دبيب أجلك أن أشكو أجلك أن أشكو إليك وأنطوي على كمد إن الهوى على كمد إن الهوى لعجيب حسبي وحسبك لوعة وصبابة أنا أول فيها وأنت الثاني نازل لك وحيها منهم ريح الوداد يطيب والراس اللي عليل على الوساد يطيب والراس اللي عليل على الوساد يطيب
Thank you. One more time, Hamid Al-Saadi, Tariq Al-Maqam, Ulay Matisan on the tenor saxophone, George Ziad on the oud, Dhafar Tawil on oud, violin and tabla, Rashid Waits on the drums, Carlo De Rosa on the bass. One more time for Ustad Hamid Al-Saadi. It's really an honor and a joy to perform with you. Thank you.
It's our programming for this week, Ismaili TV. And if you want to find out more about what's going on at the museum, don't forget to visit us at agakhanmuseum.org to find out more about our archive performances, our pocket performances, some of our lectures, our virtual exhibitions. It's all there for you to enjoy at your pleasure. And so until next time, be safe and be creative. Have a great week.